Canada must be better at teaching country's full story. This is the Great White North Report.
I'm in love with the system, never going home. I'm in love.
So the Governor General comes out and says that Canada must do a better job at teaching the country's full story. Well, if I remember right, when I started taking history in grade 7, it's when we first had an actual history class. We really did skim over a lot of stuff. And there's so much Canadian history that we don't have time for everything. Grade 7, 8, up into high school. My grade 10 history teacher, he was more interested in Elmer history than anything else. And Elmer history was very boring. I couldn't care less that the town burned down 25 years prior to that time. My only regret was they rebuilt the damn town. And I had to go to school there. And then in high school you start specializing. I did American history. And I did Canadian history again for OAC. World history and OAC. So you see we don't have enough history classes. In university and college, then you can specialize. But in grade 7, 8, most kids don't care. There are maybe one or two kids like me. I cared about history at the time. So anyway, people are gathering to mark National Day for Truth and Reconciliation across the country. I think this is the 3rd annual one. I don't really pay attention to it because I know me and most of my family history were pretty blameless. We didn't do anything. In fact, the region I'm in now, most of the indigenous populations were already killed off by the Mohawk. The Mohawk came in during the Beaver Wars and killed off all the neutral native tribes or native villages that were here. There's one not too far from me. The Mohawk came in and destroyed 40 villages and chased the neutral indigenous people over the border into the St. Clair area and up north among the Hurons. Now, I do have some elements of my family tree that fought in Massachusetts, fought the Indian Wars out there. So I'm not totally blameless that way. My family isn't, but, the main branches, no. So Canada's education system should place greater emphasis on Indigenous history and languages, as she spoke at the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation event. We need a more unified system of how we give the full story of Canada, especially in relation to Indigenous and First Peoples of this country. Yeah, but are you going to sugarcoat that history? Or are you going to tell the whole truth? If you're going to do that, you got to tell everything. Because it's not all sunshine and rainbows with the Indigenous peoples. They were just like Europeans. They fought amongst each other. They squabbled over territorial rights. And if there was a particular drought or some other climatic change, or if they overfished, overhunted, or exhausted the soil, because remember we're talking about slash and burn agriculture for the most part, and the land was played out, then they would move into another area. Overpopulation of their area would mean they would go in and they would start forcing out smaller tribes. And then you would assimilate these tribes. It was a repeating cycle. The very first nations that came across that land bridge in Siberia, probably, aren't the same ones we have today. Who knows who the oldest tribe is? Tribes were continually pushing each other out or fighting amongst each other. So make sure you mention that. So recognizing the legacy of Canada's residential school system and its harm to the Indigenous peoples, we didn't know. That part we didn't know. I would never have agreed to it myself. The idea behind the residential school system had some positives, but unfortunately the negatives were what happened. The idea was to educate the Indigenous peoples who didn't have any education before in terms of a changing and adjusting world. Canada's desire to populate our western provinces fast before the Americans came in. And we wanted to fill up the West. And the Northwest Rebellion didn't exactly help the Native peoples, who were starving. It was a bad time for them. But so would I like to see more emphasis on Indigenous history? Sure. Maybe a little more in-depth. But you got to make sure you put the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like I said, the Europeans just didn't find them there sitting like hippies in a commune, smoking pot all the time. Should be noted that the Haida and the Tlingit, I can never pronounce that word, were traditionally known as fierce warriors and slave traders, raiding as far as modern-day California. So the Haida, very fierce tribe from BC, practiced slavery. Slavery was hereditary, and prisoners of war were captured as slaves and were treated as such. Among some tribes, about a quarter of the population were slaves. The Pawnee of the Great Plains were known for slavers, and this was before pre-European contact. Long before. This was part of their life. Warfare was endemic. The Korean Inuit, they constantly fought each other. Now, Europeans exasperated this by first providing European-type weapons, iron plus guns, and also the introduction of the horse allowed for warfare to become a little more widespread because it gave an advantage to the tribe that had them first. So you got to make sure you mention these things in a history lesson. Just not all the sunshine and rainbows. Now we got rid of the residential school system. We've bowed down and asked for an apology. We've given tons of money. I know there's a lot of treaty things that have obligations that the Canadian government has not done, but that's up to the government. Most Canadians don't even know that stuff. Do I sympathize with the Indigenous peoples of Canada for the residential school system and the reservation system in general? Yes. I've been to the reservations. I know what they're like. Some of them are like, but some of them are pretty rich. Just depends where they are. Now, of course, Trudeau's out in Saskatchewan for another. So that day where all Canadians need to confront the fact that our past was not what we want it to be. Of course not. I never thought it was. If you take history as a major in university, you know these things. Especially if you're taking the Indigenous one. I took a couple of Canadian history courses in university. Did not take any Indigenous ones, which were offered, but went a different direction. Now there's some who like to brush over the past and pretend it didn't happen because they feel that talking about truth and reconciliation marking this day somehow diminishes us as a country. Well, it definitely tears us apart because now the woke mob has taken it, and I also believe they use it as a club over our heads. How many times have we heard that they use ground penetrating radar on residential schools and they find anomalies in the ground, and already people think, oh my God, there must be graves there. I, for one, would not be surprised to find a graveyard in there. They just cleared a church last week. They went to the basement of a church and looked for human remains. They couldn't find any because ground penetrating radar found anomalies in the soil, so they dug it up and they found nothing except for pieces of, pottery and nails from whatever century. They say there's unmarked graves. Hell, I could go to Mount Pleasant Cemetery in London, Ontario and find unmarked graves. I have 3 relatives there who are unmarked because their tombstones fell down or disappeared over time. 3 of my ancestors. I know I had to really look, find out, make sure they are buried there, and find out where their plot is. When I got there, trying to find it, there was nothing there. So you have to understand that the tombstones do disappear. They fall down. You go to an old cemetery, and look at the older parts. You see a lot of them are falling down. They get overgrown. These are Indigenous people, so they probably wouldn't use cut stone because that was one of the things, and they used wood, which really deteriorates, depending where they are. My hometown has a cemetery where the stones are completely disappeared and the rumor is someone used cut stone in their basement. So my idea is for all these residential schools, go back through, do the geophys, and let's start digging up the graves. Like, why would you not want to? I'd want to identify these kids, if there's kids there. Find out when they were born, what they died of. Remember the time period. Medicine wasn't all that great at the turn of the century. Not until after World War II did we start fighting diseases better. Things like dysentery, typhoid, influenza would kill kids. Even mumps and measles could kill back then. So I'd want to find out who these kids are, where they came from, so you can do DNA testing and find out what tribe they're from. Go through the records, find a name. The residential school survivors, it'd be nice if they did a tour of all the public schools, like not the little kids because they don't know any better, but definitely the high school kids. Start talking to them, let them ask questions. The residential school system was intended to destroy First Nations, Inuit, and Métis cultures and our languages, but did not succeed. Obviously not. As long as the Indigenous people kept it alive at home, it will never be destroyed, but they did destroy parts of the culture. At the time, they thought they were doing the right thing. They thought it was best because it was a problem. By today's standards, that was a wrong decision, but it was the one they made because that was the only thing they could do. Like I said, the Northwest Rebellion was fresh in the minds of the government, and they didn't want to go through that again. That was Canada's first test as a nation to see if it could succeed in putting down a real rebellion. So our chief said that still trying to change this country so we don't have systemic racism, that we don't education system, healthcare systems, and child welfare systems that systematically erase our culture and take our children away from our communities and perpetuate the same things that the residential school system tried to do. So definitely try and change things, yes. So I agree with part with this article, but I also think that they should talk about everything. Do not hold back. Like I said, the indigenous peoples were not hippies who sat around smoking pot all day through a pipe. They were fierce warriors, and were very cruel at times, just like anybody else. So that's my outlook on the Truth and Reconciliation Day. Any Canadians out there, let me know what you guys think in the comment section. And until next time, this has been the Great White North Report.
I'm in love with